I got to start off by letting you all see my sock game. If you're in the front row, I hope you can appreciate that. We got the Golden Gate Bridge going on today. I'm really excited to be here. I'm here with Andrea Austin from InsideView, and I'm here with Marc Jacobs from Greenhouse. And Andrea, let's start off with a quick background for the audience. Tell the audience about yourself.
Absolutely. So I always like to say that anything past 20 years in technologies is just 20 plus years. So 20 plus years in technology, started my career in college at IBM. So definitely worked for the man, and I've been working with InsideView for the last 2 years, and I've dabbled in some of the Valley companies. So, yeah, 20 plus years.
Great. Marc, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm not quite 20 plus, but close to 20 years of enterprise sales experience. But anyway, I am really thankful to be here, and I appreciate everyone coming. I'm VP of Sales at Greenhouse. Since hiring is one of the most important initiatives at a company, hiring really good talent, we provide the tools necessary to help everybody within the organization to more effectively source, interview, hire, and onboard the best possible candidates for a given role. I've been with Greenhouse for almost a year and a half now, and we've grown our sales team from 10 to over 60 people. And like I said, I'm really excited to be here.
Great. Welcome, Marc. Good. Just to get everybody the lay of the land, what we're going to do here, I'm going to start off with a few questions for Andrea and Marc, just to get the juices flowing. And then I see a few people in the audience that I know will have some good, insightful questions. So we'll turn the mic over to you all very quickly, so that you all can get your questions answered, okay? So we'll get started with just a couple of structural questions. And Andrea, maybe you can start us off. Just tell us how you define enterprise at InsideView.
So enterprise, and every company does it a little bit differently. We actually treat the enterprise as the size of client, and we base it on employee companies with employees, 2,500 employees and more. We certainly operate that at our business level. We have also a channel sales team, and we structure that very similarly. So we have an SMB sales team, and then we have an enterprise sales team, and the cutoff is very similar.
Okay.
We go on employee size.
Okay, great. Marc, maybe to add some color to that, can you give us some perspective? I know your background, you worked at VMware, you worked at Thomson Reuters, you worked for some very big companies. Now you're working for a startup. Can you give us some perspective on how the enterprise role might have been treated differently at prior companies you worked at?
Yeah, so it is very different at a startup, not only because it's a startup, but the SaaS inside sales model that we have is very different than what you have at some of the larger companies that I've been a part of. When you look at how we define enterprise right now, we define it, depends on, right now for our company at Greenhouse, we're defining it based on the number of employees at the company. That the companies have, and we separate we segment based off of 0 to 100, 100 to 1,000, and above 1,000. At larger companies, you could be dealing with just the Fortune 500 or even the Fortune 100 that are considered enterprise, and the way that they deal with it and the way we dealt with it there is very different. In fact, you have a lot of folks that, and I think Andrea is someone that did this as well, that that have maybe 1 or 2 accounts and an enterprise sales rep, and that's what they're focusing on. They might have a huge quota based off of that one account. Where we look at it now, it's just different. It's just a company that has a more complex buying process. It's going to take a little bit longer to get through the process. You have to navigate through it. That's the difference how we look at whether something's enterprise or not, because it could be a large company, it could be a medium company, it could be anything that actually takes a longer, more sophisticated, complex buying process.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, enterprise accounts, we found that cut, whatever it is, if it's at 1,000 or 2,500, the procurement process and the number of influencers that get involved in the deal just intrinsically changes. So a cutoff and the selling motions are sometimes different for a more transactional sale than when you get into that more complex environment. So you have to understand how to preserve something for procurement, understand how to appease IT, and then obviously coach your business buyer through their own internal processes. And that's a craft that happens typically with a certain type of seller.
That's right. Yeah. That's a great point, and just to put a specific number around that, I think what you were saying when we were prepping for the session, Andrea, was that you found that cutoff point is actually about 400 employees. Is that right?
Yeah, so we actually, the team enterprise at InsideView is actually 400 employees, and so it goes 400 to 2499, and we technically consider that mid-market. And rather than having that sit closer to SMB, we found that at about 400 employees, that buying complexity changes, and it becomes much more like the very large organizations, because the bigger that company is getting, they're starting to say, oh, we need to not just buy departmentally, we need to buy for the company. When you're at that level of buying for the company, again, IT gets a little bit more involved because there's vendor consolidation that goes on. And then when you get to the 2,500 mark, it becomes a little cray-cray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the technical term, cray-cray. That's CRA,
Yeah.
no Y. Go ahead, Marc.
It's also how you're going after that organization itself. I mean, GE, if you're going after a small section of GE, that might not be an enterprise account, although they're an enterprise company, obviously. Whereas you can have a mid-market account that you're trying to get the entire thing at the same time, bring everybody, you need to get everybody involved, and that becomes a enterprise deal, even though they may not necessarily be an enterprise account.
Yeah, good point. Another question for you, Andrea, and then we'll have you weigh in on this one too, Marc, because I think it would be helpful for the audience to get your perspective. What are a couple of key ways that you've seen enterprise selling evolve over those about 20 years that you've been doing it?
20 plus years. Right?
Sorry, I was...
No. Definitely, so when I started selling back in the not 2000s, it was definitely you go to your business buyer or your IT buyer and you just move. Procurement has definitely taken a seat at the table. And I think in the industries where you're definitely focusing upmarket, the procurement department and vendor management gets very engaged now, and they need a win. They need to be able to show back to their leadership within the organization, whether they roll up into finance or IT. It typically does go that way. They need to show that they got something out of that deal. And so that has definitely changed, and that's a norm right now. I have this conversation with my teams all the time. You need to save something for procurement, because if they don't feel like they've won, then they're going to try to hold your deal up, and it's going to continue to delay.
It's a great point. Great point. Saving something for procurement.
Oh, yeah.
Besides a kick in the shins.
Yes.
Marc, what about you?
So how has it changed? Is that the question?
Yeah. What's one or two key ways that you've seen enterprise selling evolve?
I mean, I've seen it evolve more from the difference between selling into the small accounts into the larger enterprise accounts. The process is much different, navigating through the buying process, right? As you think about these complex buying processes, you have to think about two or three main things, right? The first is really getting a good understanding of what that buying process is. And when I mean that, it's not just from a surface level, it's from digging deeper. Example, I worked recently with one of my sales reps who had a meeting, had the presentation, did the demo, afterwards, came back and talked about how the meeting went. And we talked about it, and the first thing I asked is, so what's the next steps? What's the timeline? And the sales rep said to me that they said that they want to move forward by the end of March, and they just have to get approval by the CFO, right? Well, great. So what happens between now and getting approval from the CFO? Well, I don't know, right? So you have to really dig deeper. How many times has this guy actually gotten approval from the CFO? What have they made a purchase similar to what we're selling them right now? What happens after the CFO approves that? Are they signing at that point, or does it have to go in front of board approval? Because if it's going in front of board approval, that may not happen that often. And that's the complex buying process. Getting through that is important to understand all of the steps that you need to. And then the second thing is being able to map out the different stakeholders, right? It's important to understand within the organization which stakeholders are actually getting involved. I read somewhere recently that something like 25 people in a typical Fortune 500 company will touch the decision-making process or the proposal for even just a $50,000 purchase. How do you get to know these people? Which ones are the economic buyers? Which ones are the technical buyers, champions and coaches? And we could talk about that later, the difference between those things. But those are the things. And then Lastly, is my favorite tool that I use, and that's a reverse timeline. We've all talked about reverse timelines before. When you understand and fully understand that sales process, the buying process, and you understand all the stakeholders, to be able to reverse timeline it back from when they want to move forward to now and all the steps that are in between, that's an invaluable tool. One of the things that I've seen that's make people successful is when you take that and you actually get the buyer to agree on it and to approve all of the steps, and you use it as a living document as opposed to just a document that you're going to look at and help yourself through that sales process.
And Shep, I think with the different constituents in that process, and by doing that reverse timeline, backing up from the date that it is going to close. One of the dilemmas is that frequently the business buyer doesn't even know what their own buying process is. And so if you can actually help them lay it out and help them and coach them through their own internal processes, and sometimes at the enterprise class level, you have to go and help them build that relationship with IT and build that relationship with procurement. So if you actually do back into a deal and understand all the steps that can go on, you're sometimes educating that business buyer because they're not always doing a purchase like that. They're not always engaging with the CFO for that type of purchase.
Yeah. And you get to learn if that is really something that's forecastable.
Yep.
Because if they've never done it before, you can have a lot less confidence that they'll be able to get it done this time.
Yep.
Yeah, great points. Great points. I love that point about Marc focusing on the buying process, their buying process as opposed to the selling process, and the concept. I think for many of you in the audience, you might have a pretty new solution, right? That maybe they can't pattern recognize, right? They haven't bought something like what you're offering before. So that concept of helping them actually understand and navigate their own buying process is a really important point. I've got plenty more questions for the panel, but let me turn it to the audience and see if we have a couple of questions. I see a gentleman back there with some glasses. Go ahead. We got building a sense of urgency. Go ahead. You got to turn it on. This better be a really good question.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, let me repeat the question for the benefit of the folks who didn't hear it. So the question was around building urgency, right? We just heard Marc say that in a typical enterprise sale at a Fortune 1000 company, you might have 25 stakeholders involved, right? How do you build urgency and momentum, especially if you have a timeline, right, like the end of quarter or end of year, that might not mesh with the prospect's timeline? So Marc, let me turn that one to you first for some thoughts, and then Andrea will come to you.
Great. So that is one of the biggest challenges, right? It's making sure that the buyer has the urgency that you have, because the discount that you mentioned before, the discount for moving forward by the end of December, whatever that is, that's only going to work so well. It doesn't work so well at the higher levels, as you mentioned. So the most important things are, first of all, understanding the timeline from the beginning, so that you can continually be going through that timeline with the customer. The second thing is figuring out what business impact that customer is going to have if they move forward on time, and what negative impact they're going to have if they don't move forward on time. So it's about digging in, figuring out what that impact is, whether it's financial impact, productivity impact, whatever the case may be, and leveraging that in order to make sure that it moves forward in the timeline that you're looking to move forward. And because it's about them achieving their goals, not about a sales rep hitting their quota for the month or something along those lines.
Great. Thanks, Marc. Andrea?
Yeah, it's the proverbial, how do you become a painkiller and not the vitamin, right? The vitamin is optional. The painkiller has to handle something acute. And if you're not able to tie it back to the business value, then it frequently becomes optional, and then you're just a product looking, you're a hammer looking for a nail. And you have to get that buyer to understand what the storyline is. How do they become a hero in the storyline of going against business as usual? And business as usual, you know, when you're getting a customer to buy into the storyline and they're seeing themselves as that hero, they need to look at the business as usual as the villain, right? Because in every story there's a hero and a villain, and if they don't see themselves as solving that business problem and being the hero within their organization, it's optional and you're a vitamin.
Yeah. That's a wonderful point. I love that sort of visual imagery of vitamin and painkiller. I think the one thing I would add would be make sure your reps are really, really frank and candid and sort of have the rose-colored glasses taken off, because if there isn't a business impact and that prospect can't articulate a business impact because there is none, then you might be a vitamin, and it's not a deal you should be counting on or banking on, right? Because there isn't that hard ROI.
And in SaaS, it sometimes is okay and easy to take down revenue with momentum, but in SaaS, how do you keep that customer if they don't understand how to measure success? And I think that's the death knell for SaaS, because that recurring revenue has to be tied to something of value. And I think we all get a little caught up in that top-line revenue, but I don't know about you, but InsideView measures success on the lifetime value of that customer, and we don't always make it back in the first year, but we do make it back in subsequent years. But if you lose them after the first year, whoops, right?
That's a great point. We've got a question over here. Go ahead.
Hello. Yeah. How are you guys deploying account-based marketing for your named accounts when you're going whale hunting after some of your biggest potential clients?
Great question. Andrea, I'll pass that one to you to start.
Absolutely. So those of you who don't know what InsideView does, we provide both data, insights, and connections. So tying, in account-based marketing, tying it to something that's relevant to them versus making it all about you. And so if you're trying to pitch your product, but you're not tying it back to some intrinsic business value, you're going to continue to be that vitamin. So account-based marketing is just very tailored for the specific customer that you're looking at. And if you can create watch lists or provide insights on that specific customer's business needs and tailor a campaign to them, then you're actually going to be able to be much more precision oriented, and you're not shotgunning messages out there, you're rifle shotting them. Sorry, I'm from Texas. So, yeah.
Mark, anything you want to add on that?
By the way, Mark, sorry, if you have an example, I would love to hear how you guys have tried to deploy with a particular campaign.
So I've got a great example, right? If you're a real estate broker and you're trying to sell them on mergers and acquisitions, you want a watch list that's going to tell you that they just bought a division and they're expanding an operation in a certain geography. Why don't you tailor a message and your product solution, especially if you're going after some type of HR or people-based solution? What a great opportunity to tailor and do an account-based marketing campaign to that business driver, which is their business driver. It's not about your product and offering. It's about their need. Does that help?
Okay, good. We've got a question over here.
What's your sales rep profile for an enterprise sales rep?
That's a great question. I think we had talked about traits, right? What's the profile or traits that you look for? Mark, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. So, in all sales, you look for a lot of the same types of traits, like being able to ask a lot of questions, being curious, being intelligent, those sort of things. But when it gets to the enterprise, there's some more things that you have to really focus on, and that's the thing that sticks out to me is if you think about it from a quarterback perspective, right? It's about being able to not be a person that can just do everything and get through closing the business, but being able to corral all the necessary resources that you have internally within the organization and put the right people in front of the account at the right time. So that's a little bit of a difficult thing to look at, and that's why it's important when you structure the process and you go through the interview process to be able to test if they can do these types of things. But I think that would be something that stands out to me is that's very different, because I've seen great sales reps that have been able to present great, be able to negotiate great, be able to close business, but when it comes to closing large enterprise deals, if they haven't done a really good job of building internal relationships, if their first call to the to the head of security at their organization is that, you know, I need you on a call in an hour to help me close this business. You're not going to be able to win a lot of fans and win a lot of business, so it's not scalable. That's one thing I would say stands out to me that's different from in enterprise sales from other things. That's
great insight, Mark. If your enterprise sales rep is like the quarterback, how important is the post-game press conference? Just joking. That was a Cam Newton reference, y'all. Stay with me here. Andrea, you had some great thoughts on this.
Yeah.
Tell us about the traits
for me,
you look
it's
for.
really 3 traits, which definitely the athleticism is one of them. Intellectual curiosity, right? Not just trying to answer the what, but to understand the why. So really working with the customer to get back down to let's tie this back to what is the customer's challenge and business needs. So that intellectual curiosity and, you know, not just surface leveling the internal relationships, but really clicking down into how are you going to have people help you. The second one is resilience, right? Grit. We all hear about grit these days. Enterprise selling, you hit a wall, you got to bounce off, shake it off, and hit the next wall, and bounce off and shake it off and learn and pivot. And then the athleticism, right? The quarterback. You can lose a deal alone in enterprise, but you darn sure cannot win one alone. So you have to be able to you have to have a team player. You have to have the ability to be strong and nimble and pivot very quickly. So those traits, the intellectual curiosity, the resiliency, and then the ability to be an athlete.
That's great. Good. We have another question over here.
For early startups with just a founder team, so they don't have a marketing department, an outbound sales team, what would be your advice for those types of teams that are trying to close enterprise sales, like deals 0 through 5? 1, and 2, from a tactical standpoint, has a bottoms-up approach been a successful strategy, or does a top-down strategy for whale hunting, is that more effective? Thanks.
Andrea, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so your CEO has got to be able to get engaged and help you sell those first couple of deals. And again, it is about team selling. So if you're not getting, especially on that first 0 to 5 big deals, they will make your company. And so everybody has to pivot together and really put the ego outside the door, be willing to actually craft and hone in on the right presentation. And again, just do not make it about you. You have to make it about that customer. And the more you can tailor and make them that hero, I know I overuse it, but if you make them that hero in that story and get your leadership and your resources to all understand the flow and create the arc of the story, and again, put them in the middle of that as a hero. But your CEO has to get out there and sell those first couple of deals, especially in startup mode.
Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to hit on the top-down versus bottom-up. I've never seen anybody be that successful in an enterprise deal going bottom-up alone. It's just not going to work. The way that, the best case scenario is if you can have somebody, an executive, a CEO, or a seasoned sales rep that can go top-down, and then also have either an SDR or a more junior sales rep or even a sales engineer go top up, then they can meet somewhere in the middle. But going up top, bottom up is not a recipe for being able to close enterprise business.
It's not fast, that's for sure.
No.
Good. We have a question closer to the stage here.
And then we've got one over there afterwards.
Good.
The question is about the priorities when you're selling in and you have convinced the buyer and they have a lot of priorities. Like you said, IT gets involved and it's not on the list of the priority projects, right? So it gets moved out a couple of months. What are the best practices there to keep that thing warm so that nothing else happens during that time so your project gets thrown out? So they encounter that a lot of time. So how to keep that thing warm?
Mark, you want to start with that one?
So is the question just so I understand the question, is it what can you do in that few months in between where it hasn't been a priority and you're waiting for the deal to progress through, but there's nothing you can do right now and you're trying to figure out how to keep engaged?
Making it a priority.
Oh, in terms of making it a priority, okay. I mean, it's going to go back to it's going to come back to what the impact of them not making a decision is right now, right? And if if you can really understand how they're going to be negatively affected by waiting a few months, if they're, for instance, if your solution is going to provide them with some financial gain, every day, every month, every year that they're using your solution, you can then make the argument that the sooner that they move forward, the sooner they're going to be reaping the benefits and the reward of the gain they're going to be getting. I don't know if that really answers the question, but what I would say is in between that, you should be working to figure out who else in the organization is involved and start building relationships with other people within the organization, because too often you get to a point where you rely on the fact that something's gonna happen in 3 or 4 months, and changes happen within that organization, and very often you'll find 4 months from then it's gonna happen 4 months later or 4 months later. So.
Andrew,
I think there's some of it is when you know your total addressable market, and you're doing a very active marketing campaign, and you get that initial interest, but maybe it's just not now. Create a drumbeat, right? So stay on them, as Marc referenced, understand the different personas that are in there, and just tweak your messaging a bit in those drumbeat touches to kind of keep the rhythm, because at some point they're going to be sitting in a meeting, someone's going to complain about something, they're going to be like, wait a minute, someone just reminded me of that recently, and so that drumbeat is going to help them, right? And it's even subliminal, right? If they hear it and it's said differently and it's said by someone else and they're in this meeting and they heard it together, then they're going to be like, oh my gosh, we do need to do that, right? So it can actually convert that latent interest into more of that pain. So I think a drumbeat and some of that tailored account-based marketing where you're targeting their pain point, not your solution's ability to solve a problem, and that drumbeat is really, really important.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that, because I think that's a really profound question,
It is.
right? A couple of quick thoughts. One is Jill Rowley, who I think many of you are probably familiar with, has a great expression similar to that idea of a drumbeat. And she talks about creating the water cooler conversation, right? And the way you create the water cooler conversation, that's when a couple of stakeholders that are involved in that enterprise purchase decision run into each other in the break room, grabbing a cup of coffee, and your company comes up. Because what you've been doing is you've been feeding great content marketing, right? Really relevant content to all of those people. So you actually become the topic of conversation around the water cooler. And they go, yeah, why did that project stall? Didn't we hand that down to procurement, right? So that water cooler or drumbeat thought is really, really powerful. And the other suggestion that I would have is get your enterprise reps used to asking what the other priorities are that can derail your project. Okay, salespeople hate asking the questions they don't want to hear the answer to, right? Nobody wants to ask, hey, what could get in the way? Because they're afraid somebody could be like, well, I got X, Y, Z, right? And they don't want to hear that because they feel like they have a deal. Ask. You have to know what those other priorities are, what's on their calendar coming up that could derail your sale. We had a question over here. This gentleman's been waiting for a while.
Thank you for that. So after some starts and stops, my enterprise team came online in a very meaningful way in 2015 with multiple 7-figure transactions and the like. One of those deals, one of those $1 million deals happened entirely by the telephone, not one in-person visit. Is it a trend or a one-off?
Who wants to take that one?
I think it's a one-off. I think the $1 million deals a lot of them are based on relationship. You clearly had some awesome momentum on that deal. I've not seen it become a trend yet. There's definitely more. I mean, our buyers are definitely doing. I mean, we've all seen the CEB statistics and the Forrester stats. They're over 50% down the buying process before they even come to us. So you can capture that momentum if you can keep things moving, and if they've got that pain and you've got that painkiller. You can certainly move a deal very fast. I just don't know that it's a trend, but I would love to be proven wrong because I'm waiting for that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just the level. I mean, 7-figure deals, I don't think that's a consistent trend that you can close that over the phone. But I think there is a number somewhere, that's in that $500,000 range, 300, 400,000, that you can consistently close business over the phone.
There's one over here.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, you guys, you both started by mentioning that you had built channels and worked a lot with partners. At what stage would you recommend a lot of these companies start actually reaching out to partners to start building their own channel organization to help them, start going into some of these larger customers who they already have relationships with?
Andrea, you want to start with that?
So from an InsideView perspective, we definitely went direct first, and we had a lot of momentum in our direct business, but we realized very quickly if we were going to get to 100 million and 100 million really quick, we needed to pivot into the channel space and getting other people speaking for us and on behalf of us. And with market intelligence, and we're woven into the CRMs and the marketing automation solutions, allowing those partners that do those implementations and do the BPO associated with changing a sales organization or doing a BI project or master data management, that getting them to put the skin in the game to have better data was critical. And so we definitely went pretty aggressively down the channel. I have a whole sales team that just sells through 2 or 3 business partners. And it's great. Our win rate on the referral business is fantastic. And if I just want more, right? So channel is really critical because it casts a bigger shadow for you.
Yeah, for us at Greenhouse, we're just starting to go through that process. We haven't developed a full-blown channel program yet. We obviously have some really great partners that we work with to refer each other business, but from a channel perspective, we have not gone down that path yet.
Yeah, when you do go down that path, though, make sure resilience is key for your reps there, because partners can be very frustrating because they have their own agenda and they have their own timeline for skilling and enablement, but the resilience is just don't give up on it, because if you can get it functioning, it's really worth it.
Great advice. Do we have a question over here? Go ahead.
So what best practices do you have for onboarding enterprise sales reps?
Mark, you want to start with that one? The
best
question
practices
was
for onboarding.
For onboarding sales reps?
Yep.
Well, there's a couple of them. First, you have to make sure that you have a really good cadence in place for what that sales rep's going to have to go through, and you need to work through that in the beginning and let them know exactly what the expectations are going to be. You have to be able to bring in the right people within your organization to train them on all the aspects of not only how to sell within the organization, but also the product, pricing, all of the things that are important. From a best practices perspective, I think it's just about making sure that you have a really good coaching culture within the organization, so it's not just the actual onboarding, the specific onboarding, but that there's constantly reminders and work coming from managers or other folks on the team that can work with them and share the best practices and make that a consistent cadence that happens on a not ad hoc, but actually on at least a weekly basis.
Yeah, we do. So we have a sales enablement resource that really helps because it provides the baseline structure. In enterprise, it's a little different because it's not a transactional business. So, learning the quoting tool and futzing around with all the Salesforce levers that we work with, and learning how to read the Marketo triggers. So I actually create an onboarding partner with another enterprise rep because I'm also trying to foster a team selling environment. And if they have a peer to go to ask the dumb questions that maybe I've already coached them or one of my managers has coached them on, they're not as embarrassed to ask the silly questions, and they have a peer that they can go to. And you will also find that peer wants them to be successful, so they'll actually go out of their way to take a little bit of the burden off of either one of my sales directors or even myself if it's one of my global folks. And so that onboarding partner really is invaluable. And we do it quite informally. It's just, and I even set it up with you're not their manager, right? Just invite them to your calls, maybe let them tag along to a meeting or two, and just be available to answer the questions that maybe we taught them, right, in that cadence and in that rhythm with those expectations. But they, again, they don't do it enough that it's inherent until they've actually tried it a couple of times, right?
I think that's great insight. The one thing I might add would be that I would encourage you to think about onboarding, especially of an enterprise rep, as a whole company thing.
Yes,
like it's not you alone. You need to get your product, your marketing, your finance people involved to help and contribute, and they should be willing to help. But it really is a whole company exercise. This is a very serious investment that you're making in a really highly trained and highly paid, hopefully, assassin.
Yeah.
So it's a whole company thing. I know we have a question over here, but I think we had one waiting. We'll come back to you in a moment. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Two quick questions. So for a startup who's selling into enterprise, what's the best practice, or what's a way to get an attention of, the decision maker or buyer? Because sometimes just getting to that decision maker is extremely hard because they get bombarded with a lot of messages and emails. And at what point, if you are focusing on these account-based marketing and you have top 50 accounts you're going after, you give up on them, saying, okay, let's just give up and move on?
Great questions. Andrea, do you want to start off on that one?
Yeah, so first, don't go to them with you, right? Go to them for them. And if you can be tailored in the way that you're approaching them with something that's personalized to them, then you're not making it about you, you're making it about them. And I think that is a really tactical mistake that a lot of startups make, is that they think their product is so awesome that, of course, people are just going to line up to buy it. But you have to make sure that you're using an insight that's specific to their business pain point. And frankly, we're networked. We're all selling. We're all building products. Tap into your network, right? So use your personal connections. And if you can get a person who is closer to them than you are to actually reference you in, we all know that references are better than just data and something that's specific about them. A personal connection is really important. So I think when you're in startup mode, that is just vital.
Mark, anything?
Yeah, no, I think what Andrea said, there's one point that she hit on that I thought was really, really valuable, and that's especially when you actually get to the person, having a really good understanding of what your value prop is to that particular person. Because if you start to just speak to people about the different features and things that make you a little bit different, that's not something that's important to the decision maker. They're looking to understand exactly what your value proposition is, what you are bringing to the table as an organization. What is value? It's obviously it's benefits minus the cost. So figuring out not only how you're going to help them with specific features, but what is the value for them that you're going to bring, and what is that actual quantifiable number, or what is that quantifiable thing, and what is the opportunity cost for them not to be moving forward with something like your solution.
I think those are some powerful answers. One thought I might add, and not to quibble with your question, but I think the way you phrased the question was, how do you get the attention of the decision maker? Okay? And I personally hate the word decision maker, and I hate the word gatekeeper, right? Because if you think about it, and I actually tried this exercise with my team just yesterday, I asked the members of my team, am I a decision maker or a gatekeeper? Right? And they all sort of dutifully said, you're a decision maker. And I said, what if I'm calling from Silicon Valley Bank and I want to present some funding options to Keith and Chris, our CEO and CFO? Am I a decision maker or a gatekeeper? Right? And they're sort of polite, so they were like, decision maker? I'm a gatekeeper at that point, right? Those words make me cringe, and I cringe when somebody says, oh, well, who's the decision maker on this? I think the point that Andrea and Marc made early on, the way the world has changed, there isn't really a decision maker anymore. We really are dealing in a consensus sale world.
Especially enterprise.
Especially enterprise. The gang that wrote Challenger Sale put out an article recently in Harvard Business Review called The Consensus Sale. It's a really good read, really worthwhile. It might help you rethink that approach. There might not just be one person whose attention you need to get, right? We had a question over here, and then we'll come back this way.
Hello. Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep. Quite clearly.
Yes, we can.
Two quick questions. One is we clearly learned, and it's clear that the closing activities for an enterprise and for the mid-market are very, very different. But what about the lead generation activities, like in terms of do you see the typical outbound campaigns working on the enterprise customers as well, or would you go a different route? And my second question is regarding the enterprise salespeople. It's a very long sales cycle, and obviously it's difficult, like you can't know whether the deal will close or not, but especially for the early startups, at what point do you know how to evaluate your enterprise sales rep based on kind of like the deals are moving, but they're not closing yet, and how long do you give them, and how do you really decide at which point to make the decision?
Okay, good.
Thank you.
So just to recap, so two-part question. One is how do you handle lead gen in the enterprise? Is it different from SMB or general business? And then the other is if it's a long sales cycle and you have an enterprise rep who seems to be doing well in building pipeline but hasn't closed anything yet, when do you know when it's time to cut bait, right? Or let them keep fishing? I'll turn it to you all. We'll have one of you answer one part and one answer the other.
Your choice.
Yeah, so I would say, so I'll take the last one first. Going back to the question that was earlier on, do you start top down and how do you start for the first couple of deals? If your leadership team has participated in some of those early deals, getting them back engaged, because remember, you can't win it all by yourself. So you're going to probably need the help of your leadership and product organizations and whatnot. If you're nervous about that and they're not getting those closes, participate in those cycles again. Just get engaged. Ask to be invited. And again, I don't know how many of you have seen this in your sales careers, but I certainly have. Executives want to get involved in the last week of the quarter. Well, get them involved earlier in the quarter so that it doesn't look as desperate as it actually feels, and there's a justification of I want to prove myself. So if you get involved sooner, you're going to start to realize that they're not, they're afraid of asking about the buying process, or they're not proud of their craft and they're trying to hide the fact that they're selling. I mean, I'm very proud that I'm in sales. I love my craft. And the fact that I sometimes have people on my team that are like soft-footing around asking for the business, if you're not comfortable asking the customer, what's it going to take to make this deal happen, and then you're just dancing around the topic all the time. So you'll know a little bit of that, and if you get back engaged, I think you'll start to figure out if they're cutting the mustard or not. Right.
And I'm just going to add to that part of the question that you asked. For me, it's not necessarily whether, how long the deal's been in the pipeline. If you actually can look at a buying process and align your sales process to what the buyer's needs are and have verifiable exit criteria. And Aaron Mohammed, one of the directors on my team, worked with me to come up with some really great exit criteria to make sure that our reps as we go through the sales process, we know that the deal is moving as we expect it to. And I would measure it based off of the velocity that it's actually going through the process, as opposed to whether you actually close the business. I know that's hard to do, but at least if you have those verifiable exit criteria, you'll have the ability to measure how that rep is taking the enterprise deal through the process. And then I think we missed the first part.
Yeah,
right?
so the lead gen, I have very strong opinions about sales development or lead generation. I find it's just not a transactional effort, like a transactional business is, and more of a small business, faster paced deal. These are long plays, and if you're going to round robin the leads that come in, and your reps, let's be honest, enterprise sales reps are control freaks, right? And you want them to be. And they're impatient, and you want them to be. So if you're bouncing SDRs into that relationship, and there's not a continuity point where they can trust and hand off, and again, how many deals get deeper into the sales cycle and then stall? Do you want your enterprise rep taking their time away to be calling and stalking and checking in, and John Barrows has that famous "Did I lose you?" tagline on an email. Do you want them doing that, or would you rather your SDR to do that? So handing it back into their SDR or their handful of SDRs is really important. So I believe that separating small business from enterprise sales development is vital, and I think the continuity and the long-term relationships. When you land a deal, and a lot of enterprise deal is a land and expand approach, when you land a deal, why not put your SDR back into that deal because they had developed a relationship, get referred into another line of business, but they've developed that rapport, they understand the account, they know the rep, and so it just creates a selling team versus an SDR that's going after creating an opportunity, right? But that's my opinion.
Great, I think that's well put. We've got a question in the back, this gentleman here, and then we'll come back to you.
What do you think about IFIs, IFPs coming out of the blue? what should startups do with things like that? There's a lot of effort involved in answering to them, and the chances are maybe pretty low. So rule of thumb we heard is RFP which you don't have contributed to previously is a lost RFP, more or less.
So the question was RFPs. An RFP comes in out of the blue. Should you respond or not? Mark, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It depends. I'll give it. It depends. It depends at what stage you're talking about. Obviously, if you don't have a ton to do, then yeah, that's a great thing to try to bring on a customer. Right now, the way we look at it, if an RFP's come on, but we haven't done a good enough job yet of qualifying that customer, we're gonna respond to the RFP, but it's gonna be a very generic response done by a sales engineer in our organization. But if they've taken the time to qualify, if they'll get on the phone with us and speak to us about their needs and their challenges, and we see that as someone that is a potential fit for us, yeah, we're going to put the time in to make sure that we respond the right way to be able to give thoughtful answers and be able to put ourselves in the best position to potentially win the business.
Yeah, for us, it depends. It does depend, Mark. We've stratified our organization with named accounts and then general territory. If it's in general territory, I sense that we're column fodder. I don't waste my reps' time on that. I think that's just. I don't want to be column fodder. Our team is too proud for that, and frankly, our time is too valuable. If it's a named account, yeah, I'm definitely more inclined to participate. But I definitely ask for that meeting, as Mark referenced to help re-qualify some of the buying decisions, right? What are some of the priorities? And if you can get that discussion in a named account or a targeted account, and change or at least a portion of the criteria to make it tied to your differentiators, I think it's worth it. If it's cold and it's a general territory, I feel like you're just column fodder, right? I really believe that, and I've not really regretted it. Because it's coming late and we're a bit of an afterthought. Yeah.
Yeah, great answers. If you're looking for a book that covers that subject in some depth, there's a great one out there called Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play, and it talks about handling that exact question. I think we had a question over here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I got a question coming back to the consensus sale and the importance at the enterprise to have an internal sponsor or champion. Interested to understand from Andrea or Mark any methods or tools that you've used to enable a champion to sell internally to other stakeholders.
I'll take it.
Go ahead.
First of all, I had mentioned earlier that one of the big mistakes I think that reps make in the process or anybody makes in the process is relying on the wrong person and thinking that they're your champion, when in fact they're not. They might be your coach, and there's a big difference between a coach and a champion. There's a lot of similarities, a lot of qualities that are the same. They're going to help you to navigate through the process. They're going to be an advocate for you, but the big difference is whether they have access to authority, whether they can either get you in front of the decision maker or they have the political clout within the organization to be able to really influence that decision with the decision maker. Once you know that is the right person and the champion, then it's just building that relationship, working with that person constantly, making sure they're armed with all the things that are necessary for them to sell internally, and anything that you would be selling, you want them to be able to talk about your value proposition as well as you could if they're going to be successful. And also making sure that when you're looking at that champion, that they have some kind of something that they're going to gain from moving forward with your solution personally.
Yeah, we're a challenger shop, so we definitely look for that mobilizer, right? If any of you follow the challenger, and that we will actually become that mobilizer's assistant. And we will help them build their internal materials to go and do the presentations. Again, that whole a little servant leadership type of thing and the philosophy of making them be the hero. We've got some nice technical prowess when it comes to PowerPoints and presentations and proposals. Why not leverage that to their advantage, because it's really to our advantage. So we definitely try to make the mobilizer the successful entity, and even if they're not the decision maker, they're definitely pushing things within the company, and they're being heard because they are the mobilizer, and so that's our approach.
Great, good insight. I think we have time for two more questions. Let's take these two right here. We can hear you. I'll repeat it. Just to clarify, so you are VP of Enterprise Sales. You came from IBM, Cisco, that big company world. You're working with a CEO who is new to enterprise sales and has never done enterprise sales before?
Right, and our company's Enterprise Solutions.
Enterprise Solutions. Okay.
How do you make that dynamic work well?
Good luck. Next question. Just kidding. Andrea, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I mean, especially first-time CEO, right? There's probably a little optimism and definitely happy years that goes on. So I think a lot of coaching, especially with your enterprise background and big company, in the bigger companies, as having worked at IBM many years of my career, it's a miracle anything got done. And I was told many times, you're exactly what we need at IBM, but man, you scare the crap out of me because I like to break glass. So you cannot be afraid to break glass with your CEO. And every leader, and I have this conversation with my reps all the time, don't assume that they know what they're doing. We can't, right? And so help coach and guide them so that, again, so they can look like they know what they're doing, and then they'll start learning, right? So it's harder for you, and you're going to have to do a lot of their work, but give them a role. Don't just hand the presentation to them. That is, I've seen it done over and over again. I'm going to bring my CEO in, I'm going to bring my CFO in, and they're just going to do what they do. Well, they don't know what you want them to do. So be prescriptive, right? Tell them what you want their role to be, and even coach them if the conversation goes this way, pivot this way, right? Lay out the roadmap for them. And I think then that first-time CEO will appreciate and want to be more involved, and will actually learn how to shut up, right? Because that's very important. Sometimes we got to get people to just shut up, right?
Mark, I know your CEO's in the room somewhere, so does that mean you want to answer the question, or
he didn't want to hear the answer?
Do you want to weigh in?
No, that was exactly what I would say as well.
Perfect. One other thought that I'll give you in that scenario. So I was in a sort of similar scenario. It was a second-time CEO. Transparency and visibility is critical, right? This is probably a pretty smart analytical guy, right? Give him visibility. For us, we actually co-located. So we were all sitting in one room, and he could see the activity, right? We gave him access to Salesforce right away, right? So don't try to hide or operate over here and say, stay out of my way. Actually bring him in and let him see all of those things that are happening, and I think that will help as well. We have time for one last question right here.
Hi, I just have a quick question regarding the tools and strategies you guys have implemented to help shorten that enterprise sales cycle. We all know, depending on, like, I think you mentioned enterprise for Andrea is, 400 to 2,500 employees.
And
up. What have you guys used, with your sales teams to help reduce that very long sales cycle?
Great. Tools and strategies to reduce the sales cycle.
Yeah,
Mark,
so of course.
Andrea,
yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You're talking, please.
Well, we use InsideView. Of course we do, because it's our own technology, and we sell to sales and marketing. And so that actually allows us to be very precision-oriented on focusing on the data, the insights, and the connections. The connections is really vital. We're a Salesforce, Marketo shop, and we find those, it's a lot of it is how you enforce the usage of those things. And I even had a conversation with my leadership team, because we're implementing an executive sponsorship program right now, especially on it's all on the enterprise side, and our executives are the worst at putting their activity in Salesforce. So I'm going to do a little coaching session for them, and so a lot of it is the tools that you choose. It's how you actually create a cadence around the use of those and best practices, because you can spend a whole lot of money on technology, but if you're not actually helping people understand how to use it and the purpose of using it, it's not just for me to look at activity for my reps. It's actually for handoffs and transitioning from sales into the customer success organization and bringing other people in. And then same thing with Marketo, interesting moments, right? That's awesome. We didn't used to expose that to our sales force. We now do those types of things. So I think, the tools, it's a lot about how you implement them and kind of enforce that.
Mark, anything to add?
We use a bunch of different tools. We're using InsideView a lot to help us to work with the reps to make sure that we're getting through the process in an efficient manner, but also making sure that they're hitting all of the things that they need to hit in each of those steps. I would say the biggest tool, and it's not a solution. It's what I said before. It's a reverse timeline. It's making sure that document is used properly, coaching reps on how to use it, understanding all the steps that need to go from now through even the next step to the next step until they want to be up and running. And like I said earlier, it's making sure that the buyer, the customer, is on board with what you think those things are. Confirm that stuff. Make sure that they are they agree with all the things and keep it as a living document. Work with them every time you're speaking to them. Just see where you are in the process, and that way you'll have a much better chance of navigating with them more quickly through the process.
Sounds like we have time for one more question. So is there one more question out there? You go ahead. If you didn't get your question answered, we will be hanging out. Come find us. So please feel free, track us down. Go ahead.
This kind of goes back to the tools you were talking about. Presentations are critical to the sales cycle. Is there any tools or secrets that you use to keep everyone singing off the same sheet of music, or ensuring that your slides and what you're using are all up to date? If you have 80 people, they're not making disparate messages out there based off some presentation 6 months ago. Any tools, any presentation management?
We store things in Box, and we reference it through Chatter and Salesforce. So we don't store documents in Salesforce because that becomes heavy. But we link them to that within the Chatter with the documents into Box, and it helps navigate. Salespeople are, again, impatient and a little ADD, so having them source through Box is sometimes overwhelming for them. We're actually right now considering content management, so it's another mechanism to make it tied into our sales process and just allowing it to link into the source document. But we're big advocates of Box because pushing PowerPoints around, version control, and logos that should and shouldn't be used it can get you in a little bit of hot water.
We do a similar thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I might add is, for us, some deviation from the norm is okay. So for us, we want to have core messages the same. We want to have some version control over the PowerPoints that are out there, but actually an enterprise rep putting their own spin on it and adapting it for the particular situation they're facing is just fine. Okay. With that, we'll wrap the session up. Thank you all very much for your time. Andrea, Mark, thank you so much.
And great questions, guys. That's awesome.